Shit's about to get crazy. Fetishizers, watch your back. Racists, watch your back. But also tune in, because this is also for you. I was too excited to come into the studio today. I came in early, which for those of you guys who know me, I don't really come early to things. It takes a lot for me to show up on time, okay? It's kind of like an existential thing. We'll get into it later. It's a little bit of like an intention thing of me wanting to maximize every single last second that I possibly can, which means that I have like an anxiety and it provokes that, and like showing up late, there's a part of me that's a little bit addicted to that rush of, oh my God, can I get to this on time? I have a very, very strong, I had a strong fear of like waiting around and not be, it doesn't matter. Okay, we're gonna get into that later. We are talking about feeling undesirable. We are talking about feeling ugly, unsexy, rejection, fetishization, especially for my queer besties, especially for my BIPOC besties. This is the episode for you. That being said, it also applies to if you are not in those groups, still lock in, okay? This is still for you. But for so much of my life, this is something that's been on my mind, especially when I was single and I was so mopey and I was so like, oh my God, no one wants to date me because of my race specifically, which is not entirely true. It was also because I was mentally unwell and crazy. This was the hill that I would die on. And yes, first world problems to the max. Okay, I'm going to call that out, that this is a very privileged place to be in. And also, I had some people respond to my Instagram story talking about having like disability, for example, and how when you have a disability, it's like throw gender and gender presentation and masculinity and femininity out the window. People just see you for that thing, which I feel like is similar to race or ethnicity or other identity markers, where it's like people only see you for that thing, which is the root of the problem, or one of the roots of the problem that we're going to get into. Like, these are just things that I feel like in our everyday culture, we just got to talk a little bit more about, which is exactly what we're doing on No So True. Some guest contributions in for this one. I wanted to enlist the opinions and the perspectives and the experiences of the people on the gram, and just hear about some of the stuff that you guys have to say to this. And I'm excited for my guest, Daniel Chang, college friend. We haven't talked for a little bit, but he is another fellow Gaysian, and he is here to rock your world. And so that is coming up soon. Now, diving into it. Oh my God, I really don't think my hair looks good right now. Okay, that just made it worse. Okay, great, wonderful. And so I hope that, you know, if you're listening, this at least somewhat applies to you, because I feel like it could be a very invalidating place to be in. I had a family member who I will not name, but I had a family member who was basically like, okay, who cares? Like, if you're like, if you feel like you're ugly, or if you feel like, you know, like white guys aren't gonna like you, then like, who cares? And also like, you're good looking, like it, but the truth of the matter is, it has less to do with whether or not you're objectively good looking, as much as it is just that feeling of like loneliness and isolation, and feeling like no one's going to like you or no one's going to want to hook up with you. That I feel like is a very universal thing, even if you are hot, especially if you do not fit into the conventional white Western beauty standard. I actually had one of my best friends reach out to me, love you, bestie, if you know who you are, and basically just kind of like called out that, you know, a few years ago when we were in college, when I had told them about like how I just felt really ugly and I felt alone, and I felt like no one in the toxic gay community that is Harvard would really look at me, or people just didn't want me specifically because of my race. At least that's what it felt like, and that's in some ways what I made it out to be. They kind of apologized in a way, and said, like, looking back, you know, perhaps they weren't the most validated, and they kind of looked past it. And it wasn't until they listened to the Las Culturistas podcast, where they just talked about all the shit that Bowen, you know, saw on Grindr, and some of the evil, heinous, sinister, and hurtful things that would be said to him. And I can totally relate to that in terms of being told, like, you're not my type because you're Asian, or I don't fuck Asian guys. I once had someone ask me for a face picture, which is a very, very risky thing to do. It takes a lot of bravery. It takes a lot of courage to send a face picture on the Grindr, okay? And then they were kind of like, cute. Are you half Asian? And I said, no, I'm full Asian. And then they blocked me. after they had already seen my face. I was on the Reddit threads because yes, I go deep down into those holes when maybe I shouldn't. And it is crazy to me that some people don't even believe that sexual racism is a thing. Like, people think that it's creepy and weird to even bring up sexual racism because it isn't your business, and it talks about people's sexual preferences or like who they want to have sex with or who they don't want to have sex with. That is so wrong, okay? You're not the worst person in the world if you've ever been sexually racist. I am not a perfect victim, and that's something that we're going to talk about later too with Daniel, is that like we and I and people who have grown up, perhaps they're in suburban, Midwest, whiter places, who grow up to feel like being Asian or being BIPOC or being, not white or not cis or not what conventional whatever are undesirable. Those people, including myself, also have that internalized prejudice against ourselves sometimes. And it wasn't until college that I realized that my preference was an issue. For me, when my good friend Jeremy, other fellow gay Asian in my grade, and there weren't that many of us who were out at least, I remember being like, yeah, I just don't really think I'm attracted to Asians. And he was like, I feel like that's kind of self-hate. And I was like, what? Self-hate? No. And he was right. That internalized racism runs deep. It's like a burden that I feel like we have to carry. Again, a first world burden, but a burden nonetheless of feeling like, what do we do with this information that we don't even think that our group of people is desirable? I think what we should not be doing is just saying, yeah, but it doesn't matter, you're hot though, or like, oh my God, I just don't get it. Like, you're so sexy, you're so hot, like, fuck white people, whatever. Like, yes, sometimes fuck white people, but I just feel like we need more conversation about that feeling and having validation around feeling like you are hurt, honestly. And your feelings are hurt. Something that I'm starting to say now is that invalidation is avoidance. Our perception of ourselves and our self-esteem that is so connected to how we're being perceived by other people really does affect us. For me, honestly, I make career decisions based on my desire for people to finally see Asians as sexy. I went into the entertainment industry partially because I felt like there was such an invisibility and there was such an absence of Asian and Asian men specifically being seen in the limelight as sexy. And yeah, okay, sure, like I wanted to be a part of that. Like, I really felt like I was maybe cut out to do so. I'm 5'7", I'm a short keen, but still. Another thing that I feel like I sometimes just can't talk about with my white friends is fetishization. Like, genuinely, some people don't get it. Like, I feel like some of my white gay friends even, it's like the ease that we're able to, some of us, throw out just these stereotypes only further reinforces the othering that occurs when it comes to attractiveness, rejection, etc. On my Instagram, when I put this story out, like, I was so honestly excited to see the response of just like all the shit that people have experienced and they want to talk about it and they want to share their story. And that is what we're going to be doing right now. Let me just put this out there while I'm looking for this. Men deserve to feel sexy too. Okay, whether you're a cis, straight, white guy, whatever, you deserve to feel sexy too. Okay, a lot of all of the shit that we experience as BIPOC people, as queer people, a lot of this has to do with how men treat other men, okay? Like, I went to the masses again, and I talked about if anyone has something to say about feeling undesirable, feeling unsexy, ugly, not confident, especially if you're in the queer community or if you're BIPOC, talking about white beauty standards, racism, body dysmorphia, insecurity, feeling undateable or inadequate, masculinity, etc. Thank you so much to the people who shared. I'm going to give a little bit of a shout out. Think of this as like calling into the podcast, okay? So one friend, one truthie, Alejandra, responded to my story, and she talked about being on the dating apps. She is a Latina woman and feeling fetishized. To those who can relate, it's exhausting. I'm currently on a break from the apps because it felt overwhelming. My response to any man who has hit me with the hot Latina line or where are you really from? By the way, I can't believe that they actually did that. It's 2024. Even if you're an underground racist person, you know not to say where are you really from. Like, it really has me thinking, like, straight people are on some other level. Like, straight guys, like, was it because you thought you were being ironic and somehow flirting in a way? Like, is that what was going on? Anyways, miss me with that. They usually get unmatched. Props to you, Alejandra. I don't find they're worth the time and energy to correct. Huge. This speaks more to the dating app experience, but I did think it was interesting to see what would happen if I used a nickname versus my full name, aka Alejandra versus Ali. The mysterious algorithm changed when I used my nickname, and I was no longer placed into a category where the only men I seemed to attract or shown as options were those that fetishize and hypersexualize BIPOC women. Wow. IDK if it's the apps or the people, but it's overall draining to try to find a genuine connection, at least on the apps. The fact that going by Ali changed effectively the amount of racism she received, like being able to code switch, being able to almost whitewash yourself or almost kind of like code switch in a way so that people don't perceive you as ethnic, that being what helps you avoid the bullshit and the racism is crazy to me. Like, this is the algorithm at play basically upholding whiteness, right? And this reminds me of something that I read from the Harvard Gazette, How Dating Sites Automate Racism. Sociologist April Williams talks about how basically the algorithm is only continuing to uphold and institutionalize and construct our racist preferences. I thought this was funny. Someone in the audience asked why they were getting so many unattractive people in their deck match, said William. Rudder joked, we don't know who Rudder is, we only know who Williams is. Whatever, read the thing if you want to. Rudder joked, if you think your matches are ugly, that's probably because you're ugly. Okay, if you're like me, I know a hella people are kind of like, all of my Hinge matches are so ugly. Okay, ask yourself, are you ugly? But also, I do feel like Hinge do be giving you the uglies. What dating apps do is automate sexual racism, making it hyper-efficient and routine to swipe in racially curated sexual marketplaces. According to a 2014 study by OkCupid, users rated Asian men and Black women as less attractive than their counterparts. This is anti-Blackness and anti-Asian sentiment. And these come from deeply rooted historical and contemporary ideas about how we view Asian masculinity and Black femininity. Now let's cut to the chase here. Some people want a curated experience, said Williams. If they want to be able to say, I only want to look for women who are Latina, or I only want white femmes, the apps work for those folks. But those on the receiving end are often not having a good time. On the contrary, across the internet, women of color report being targets of racial fetishization. So I guess the point is like that kind of curation basically just encourages and reinforces fetishization to happen, because the only matches that these people or people of color are getting are the ones who hand selected them or swiped to specifically only include them. When our connection is dependent solely on attraction, physical attraction, immediate physical attraction, bad things ensue. Like, the reason why the apps, I feel like, are making people feel so much more lonely is because your attractiveness is what is being assessed when people are assessing who you are as a person. And especially when it comes to men, I can certainly say this. Claws come out. The worst versions of ourselves come out when we're trying to fuck people, or when we're horny, H word, and we are judging people based on our carnal instincts. That's when we are the meanest of people. Alejandra, let's talk. Next, one of my good friends, Joshi, had something to say. And let me just say that Joshi is a white twink, okay? Like, as much as I hesitate sometimes to give white gays more of a platform, he's not like the other white gays, okay? I was going to say it's because he's a twink. He said, something I think about often is how cis gay men saw what the beauty standard did/does to women and yet followed suit with this Ken beauty standard. Like, did we learn nothing? More so related to body image. And like, it's so sad too, and I hope it gets better for baby gays now. But there were so few examples of queer love growing up. So few other gay people outgrowing up, so many of us didn't get to learn what a relationship is for two men, didn't have the opportunity to stumble through a first love in middle and high school. And sadly, for so many, our introduction to like our sexuality and romance is porn and Grindr and literal adults trying to hook up with you as a minor. So we go into adulthood with this really fucked up, over-sexualized schema, love that word, of what love, romance, sex is supposed to look like for us. Literally, I have nothing to say except for snaps. And now with social media being everything, I think it's just hugely difficult to feel good about yourself when all you see are these perfect Ken doll personas online. And then you take that, we live in LA, and so many of the gays here have work done and non-traditional jobs so they can spend 2 hours in the gym every day. I thought this part was funny. When you couple this with no one in LA fucking working and no one having a job and their job being going to the gym, like, sorry, I feel like that's kind of loser behavior. Like, that's when this just becomes 100. Anyways, I digress. And go get facials and Botox and filler, etc. It feels hard to compete with that. And I am literally like not ugly. I'm skinny. What? And yet I still feel like I can't measure up. So I can't even imagine how it must feel for BIPOC gays. Thank you for your solidarity. Thank you. And it just makes me generally sad, like what the queer community went through with the lavender scare and McCarthyism and then AIDS crisis. Like this is not what all those people fought and died for. Where like a snake eats its own tail. And then I asked him to actually to talk. So here's his voice.
Yeah, I know. It's like, it's honestly so messed up. And like another thing is I used to go to Crunch Gym in West Hollywood because I was like, oh, it's like a gay gym. It's in West Hollywood. And me, like, my inner child is like terrified of the gym because it's like a scary place with like straight men, and it like brings on the like, I don't know, like
Super
your
fair.
inner child like fears of like being perceived when you were younger and like gym class and like, you know, being around straight men.
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, I'll go to Crunch
Big mistake.
and I'll feel so much better. And I ended up feeling worse and literally canceled my membership because it was
Good.
like, oh, this is actually worse. It's all gay men.
Also,
and
the place is tiny, I feel
of the
like.
people who go to this gym are porn stars or OnlyFans people or actors.
Wait, sorry, no, not to shame.
And they don't have traditional jobs, so they're there for 2 hours, and they
AKA
all
they have no
like
jobs.
perfect bodies because, like, as you said, that's their priority, and we like uplift that as well.
Right.
And it was like even more uncomfortable, and I was like, wait, if I went to like a gym with a ton of straight people, the reality is they're probably not actually paying any attention to me. But then in a gym like this, everyone actually is paying attention to you because all the gays are like cruising the whole time. And I just think it's so messed up.
Thank you, Joshi. Literally, thank you so much for this. I can totally agree. Entering the conversation is the huge muscly body aspect of it too. Someone else responded to one of my other friends that feels like they said, he said he doesn't feel like he can be in gay spaces if he isn't like super jacked, super muscular, etc. I fear I'll never feel included in gay men's social spaces unless I have big muscles. Huge, okay? Also, but no, okay, not to do the whole invalidating thing because I literally just called that out, but how many of those people who have big muscles, we're talking about white gays here, how many of those people are you at the brat pregame at have good faces though? Like, sorry, hate to say that. I don't think I'm helping out my cause necessarily, but just having the muscles doesn't cut it, especially if you have the haircut, no hair here, so much hair here, and you're like muscular and you have a fucked up face. Doesn't change the fact that you have a fucked up face. Sorry about it. As someone who also, like, I can say that as someone who also feels ugly, okay? One of my other besties, so yeah, like Lotsa, L-O-T-S-A, gay white men are racist, but also, why would you want to be with someone who's racist? Oh. Also, on my poll, when I talked about, especially if you're Asian or BIPOC, have you experienced rejection, fetishization, or both? 12% said rejection, 21% said fetishization, 66% said both. 66%. And the sample size is greater than 30, which, if I remember correctly, does mean something. So over everything being centered around whiteness, I'm hot too. Yes, king. My other friend, on average, I feel around a 4 out of 10 plus 4 out of 10 more attractive outside the US and Europe. Maybe +1 in Europe over US. LOL, I feel that. I, an Asian guy, always thought I was ugly, and then I went to Asia and realized it's America. True. Literally so true. Removing from the white mass beauty standard has been the most liberating thing ever. That is from the one and only D. Chang, and we're going to talk to him. After we talk to Daniel, we're going to get a little bit into my story, because I know I gave you guys I gave you some tidbits, little like things to hold on to, but didn't really elaborate. We are going to get into that.
For those who don't know, I was a competitive swimmer all growing up. I swam in college. I swam post-college, went to, like, tons of national and international meets. And my whole, like, I guess, dark cloud looming over my head throughout my whole swim career, which was, like, just an added layer on top of trying to swim fast, was, like, my appearance, right? Like, I was a 5'6", tiny little, like, Asian swimmer, very not masculine presenting as well. Swimmer on deck at these meets that were, like, very hyper competitive amongst all of these, like, very white dominant competitors. And so it was just
you're literally competing against them. You're, like, going against them in a setting.
Yeah. And on top of that, you're going against them in a setting where you're wearing nothing. Like,
yes.
Your whole body's exposed.
Yeah. Swimming is so gay. Like, I don't know why. I mean, obviously there is conversation about this, but I actually feel like swimming was my, like, gay awakening in a lot of ways because, like, you're in the locker room. That's, like, the first naked guys that you're exposed.
You are constantly exposed, and there's no hiding from it was, like, my body and my appearance relative to all these, like, masked straight white competitors was just so evident. I draw so many parallels between, like, my life as a swimmer and my life as a, like, queer Asian male person. People didn't automatically assume that I was as competitive as I actually was, which I always, like, got really defensive and upset about, which I've now learned through therapy that, like, that was a manifestation of my own insecurity. Kind of the same parallel I always feel is, like, feeling the same jealousy and, like, urgent reaction when people, like, know I'm gay right away. Right? It's like, and especially once I started to, like, have more queer friends who are straight passing. And just kind of feeling that, like, side-by-side experience of, like, oh, you've actually never had somebody just, like, jump to the conclusion because it's, like, on your face or you're wearing it on your body.
I don't know about you, but I've been in situations where I felt like, do I have to settle? You know, do I have to settle? Like, it feels like no one really wants me. And so when it comes to, like, fetishization, you know, there's so much bullshit that goes around it, and feeling like, do I have to settle with someone who wants me only because I'm Asian? Like,
the settling thing is interesting for me. I feel like there's almost a like, media presented goal that the queer person of color must, like, strive to date the white person. And I feel like it's so rare to see, like, especially Asian gay men with, like, not a white boyfriend.
Yes, I know. Yes,
you know?
Exactly.
And so it's like, when I think about the whole, like, settling concept, like, unfortunately, and this is something I've worked on a lot, is, like, not seeing, you know, when I, like, don't date a white person, it's like, oh, am I settling because I couldn't achieve the white person? Kind of like I don't know, I feel like that's the way that it's always portrayed. I heard this saying recently that was really funny. It's like, I know my worth, but sometimes I'm on sale. Like, like,
no,
that's in there.
I once, like, so I can relate to that very much, where I remember having a conversation with my friend, and it was when I was single and kind of on a bender, and I, like, hooked up with someone that I kind of, it became clear after, but I had a sense before that maybe they were, like, a rice queen. And so I had like a big debauch. I did hook up with them. And I felt bad about it after, and I talked about it with my friend who's not Asian, and he was like, well, I feel like if you think he's a rice queen and you hooked up with him, then I feel like you won. And I was like, I feel like we all lost. Like, I feel like I did something bad.
It's like, I flipped so far back and forth between, like, you know what, just be selfish. Like, it's not my problem. Like, I did what I wanted, and, like, I'm going to walk away from it. And then I flip on the other side where I'm like, no, it's my job and responsibility to, like, educate these people so that they realize that their, like, behaviors are harmful, blah, 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 blah. And I've, like, done that before, like, following first dates, and obviously there was not a second date after I, like, have gone on hour-long rants to people when they've said, like, one problematic thing to me, and I'm just like, you know what, there's not gonna be a second date, so I'm just gonna, like, go for it.
And what would that have, like, what did that look like? What did they say?
Talking about, like, tops and bottoms and, like, sex. How deep do we go in this pod?
Oh, you can't. Oh,
okay.
Yeah, we can say it all. We can say it all.
Okay, yeah. No, I, like, went on a date with this guy. He was, like, a 6'4", like, super gym bro, like, white guy. And, like, we, like, went on a date. We went back. We hooked up. And he said something, like, oh, like I expected you to bottom.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, like that's a maybe.
What do you
like
mean?
yeah. And I was like, I could make this nothing, but I just feel like making this something right now.
Yeah.
So I was just like, oh, like why? And then he straight up was just like, oh, because he didn't even say like, oh, because you're shorter than me or try to do anything. He was just like, oh, because you're Asian. And I was like, oh, okay, why? And I just like kind of kept going into it, and then it honestly led into my whole rant of just like, you know, like assigning tops and bottoms is obviously rooted in a lot of these other layers of things, and like I'm gonna take the time to educate you on why like Asians are assumed to be bottoms and all that stuff. So clearly there was not a second day after that, but I feel like I got my piece out.
Yeah. Well, can you also give us a little window into like what you actually said? Because I think that's so admirable, and I kind of like gave that preface once of like, if you're gonna hook up with me just because I'm Asian, like it's not gonna happen. And like I think it did something. It might have not done anything because they didn't really say anything after. But yeah, how did you even approach that?
Yeah. Well, my like starting or finishing and both tagline is, why would you let racism, patriarchy, heteronormativity rid you of 50% of sexual experiences? Like that's my baseline, is because that's how I felt. Like I felt like I was put in this box of like, you can only enjoy sex this certain way because this is the only way that men, white men, desire you. And so like, therefore, like this is the 50% of experiences you get to have. And it was just wild the first time I just like broke out of that box basically and was like, I don't know why I ever thought that. And then, so I always just kind of lead with that. I'm like, the whole point of being queer is that we're outside of the binary, right? So like, why do we try to reassign this top bottom binary back on top of it? And then let's add the layer of like patriarchy and why you have to have a top and a bottom, and why we feel like we always have to ask like, who's the man and woman in the relationship? And then you add white supremacy and racism structures onto that on top, and it's like, well, why do we assume that Asians are the more submissive to the white person? And all that.
I feel like we could go on and on. Like I want to talk about it, all of it.
It's like, I know there's those jokes that are like, turning 25 and your prefrontal cortex develops and you just like I mean, I'm not even joking, it was like the month of my 25th birthday and I was like, oh my god.
And you had that change, you had that like shift in terms of how you were going to position yourself, kind of, or how you saw yourself
and I
this
just
way.
Totally. And I just like, I've started to just like, whenever people ask me, I'm just like, oh, like, don't identify, and they're like, why? And I'm like, do you want to hear the
you don't identify as a top or a bottom, is that what you're saying?
No, and I'm just like, so it just feels so ridiculous to me now that we like have a binary in the queer community, you know? It just like that feels so like at war with each other. So.
Very like antithetical to exactly what you were saying of kind of going past the binary in the first place.
Right. And that's like the whole point.
Yeah, and I feel another part of this too is like, some of us, like, I feel like we don't even know if we're bottom, like if we do that or not, because like at least especially when you're kind of younger and like perhaps there's more scarcity around gay experiences, and when you're first exploring, like for me, like it almost wasn't even a question of if I could explore being a top, you know, like my first boyfriend was like a white guy who was like 6'3", I don't know. And it was almost like I too accepted that my first, you know, time in that way was going to be that. And then like, I think it just continues with that of like, well, you do what you're familiar with. Like it's just been that way. Like it just like literally like the perception initiated the action, and then the action has just kind of continued for years and years and years. Although I have explored more like since then. But yeah, like you could really just hit that train and just keep going on that train.
Yeah, and it just makes you think like how many other kind of like the comfort in your own skin, specifically with sex, but also just with dating and everything else, like the way that you show up to a first date, like how much of that was rooted in the way you felt like you were in a box on your first date because of your identity and because of the counterpart you were with. And so I just think I've been like constantly learning more things about myself as I like think like, oh, why do I actually think that way? So
I think that that's actually a great selling point in terms of like, why would you limit yourself to, like 50% of the population? And I think that's something that's been helpful for me is seeing some of the BS that like white men get themselves into when they only like white men. Like, we all know, and this is, of course, for the cis gays, we all know that, like, white gays are evil. Not all of them.
Yeah. Well,
but
it's a safe assumption.
But a lot of them, a lot of us are fucked up. But I feel like I know some white guys who are kind of with it. They have an awareness, but it's because they've experienced some other kind of trauma or hardship that has given them the tools and the language and the awareness and the understanding of, I guess, not being shallow, but that's not a given for most other white guys. So I feel like I see the kind of guys that some of my close white gay guys like either date or hook up with, and it's like, oh, that's the thought. That's the thought. It's just like, oh, like that's not what I would want. And if that's not what I would want, then maybe I can question like this box that I'm putting myself into and the box that I see myself as wanting or who I should aspire to want.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually curious for you because I feel like I had this realization only recently. Like, I would always strive for, like the people on your roses on Hinge or whatever, like those, stereotypical white gays, like the kind of ideal image people. And I used to be so upset when I like basically couldn't get their male validation approval. Like, and it was like the realization of exactly what you're saying of like seeing the type of people that they end up with are like clearly not what I look like at all. And it was like having that realization a few years ago of like, oh, like I'll actually never, like that's never a life I'm going to live was like pretty hard. I don't know if you ever like had that of just like, oh, like I'm actually never gonna like, that's like not, maybe not in the cards for me, but then obviously that evolved into what you're saying, which is like, that's never what I wanted. Like,
it is hard to be able to internalize that, to be able to be like, I may never have that. And maybe I'm going to choose to believe that I'm not going to have that for my own sake. And that can be really sad. Like, because we all want like the hottie with the whatever.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I felt like in some ways that was ultimately liberating and freeing because I feel like getting older, when you get older, you start valuing like being attracted to people who find you attractive. Like I think you take away a little bit of that like self-sabotage and that self-hatred of aspiring to something that like doesn't want you back. And feeling like, oh my God, like someone sees that in me, like I like that. And so I think that's part of it. And then also knowing that it's like, it's not in my control, nor should it be, to like literally try to change someone's preferences.
Yeah.
Like there's only so much that I can do for someone to be like into me. And if I have to do that, like, that's just like a pretty hefty price to pay, I think. Because then even if it's the best case scenario and you're dating them, it's also how do you justify to yourself like, oh, like I tricked them or I won them over or like I'm different than the others, like the other Asians or the other people of color, and I like did that. Like that also doesn't feel great either. So I felt like it was ultimately like sitting down and realizing that all of the scenarios are kind of dead ends.
Yeah. And even like a layer shallower of like, I feel like when I have friends, like my white gay friends who do subscribe to that model, and I'm like, I don't want you to like me, but I want you to like expand your horizons and like maybe open your eyes to like not instinctively turning it back to the POC in the room, but it's like that's also not my job. I don't know. It's like kind of drawing that line too. And it's like, you know what, you're going to do what you're going to do. And honestly, like maybe I'm saving a POC from having to deal with you. So.
Exactly. That's part of it too.
One thing I think about a lot is that as queer people, I feel like at a much younger age, we have a better sense of who we are, because we're forced with this question early on in our lives, like, who are we? And like coming out is obviously an experience. And I feel like compared to our straight peers, it's like they've never had to like face that question head on, at least at the young age that I feel like a lot of us had to. And I feel like an extra layer on top of that is kind of like, as like a queer person of color who is like not fitting the stereotypical mold, it's like I feel very fortunate that I've had to challenge myself to ask questions of like, what do I find attractive? What do I find valuable outside of this lens of specifically like white stereotype media, perfect chiseled, you know, like this image that's been fed to me. I feel like I'm going to value that a lot later into my life as well. And I'm glad I'm like forced to grapple with those questions now, because I meet people older than me who do fit those molds, who like I don't feel like have had to approach those questions and may not get that opportunity. I remember having this moment at the time, like my best friend in Seattle was another gay man. He was white. And I was just realizing all these differences and experiences that we had of like dating, both being single, like dating app experiences especially, and like also just the way that like we approach dates and like our confidence and experiences with all that. Anyways, all of this kind of led to like me having that realization of like, oh my God, like I'm actually not a white man. And this is like crazy.
Damn.
And it was like
the difference is so jarring.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like, it was a very factual statement that was weirdly like so enlightening. I was like, whoa, like I'm never going to have the same experience as this white person. And that's like, it's not a bad thing. It's just like a fact, you know? And it's like, that was kind of the starting point of now I feel like I'm in this point where I don't feel like I have to compare myself to this like white standard or white ideal as much anymore. And I think I had said this in the Instagram reply. It's like the first step into like unlearning the white ideal masculine beauty standard has been like so like weight off my shoulder. And the way I would always like describe it to people during this realization was like, I'm not trying to be like a certain type of hot anymore. I just like want to be hot, which has been really fun.
Wow.
I mean, on the base level, it was like I was trying to kind of tying back to what I first said was like, I've always wanted to be that like super tall masculine swimmer figure that people look at and they're like, oh my God, you were clearly an Olympic trial level swimmer. And like, I just had that realization of like, I will actually never be that image. And once I took out that one image of like what I wanted and thought I should be, I like actually realized that there were billions of other images that I could choose from. And that was like, it sounds so simple, but it was like so like so enlightening.
Definitely. I now feel like I can see how hyper connected the swimming era and upbringing and your years of doing that are like so interconnected with your dating life and romantic life and your own self-perception. In terms of your ability to be in a relationship.
Yeah, and like I think self-perception's a big part of it because I'm like, well, I have the same resume as all these other people. Like I'm at the same competitions. Like, why am I not treated the same? Like, why am I not looked at the same? And so, but it was, it's like, oh, because that's like one image. I could be like, what other ever form of like, I had only subscribed to this model that was what it meant to be like hot and desirable. And then there was just this sudden realization of like, oh my God, I'll never be that. Oh my God, also, there's like a billion other types of hot I could be. For me, that manifested like in the smallest forms. That day I went to Ulta Beauty and like got a makeup consultation. I was like,
girl.
Hey, like I want to make myself like hot, and I feel like the way I want to do that is like I want to explore like some like artistic expressions. That, and then I went to a thrift store and I started shopping in the whole store and not just in the men's section, which is like a basic thing. And like, not that I mean, it started with just buying like a pair of women's pants that were bright yellow because you just don't find good clothes in the men's section of a thrift store. And it was just like that small, just like, oh my God, there's not this one image anymore. Like I can actually shop in the whole store, or I can like express my confidence in beauty and attractiveness, like in so many other ways than trying to subscribe to like looking like a certain swimmer, which is what I thought I had to do.
Okay, I have to know. I feel like the puzzle pieces are puzzle piecing right now. Do you feel like when you got to that place of recognizing in yourself, like, I don't have to subscribe to any specific box or beauty standard for myself, was that also the opportunity for you to say the same thing about other people and who you saw as attractive?
Yes, I think that was less of a light switch, I think, though. But I've realized that they're very interconnected. Being judgmental is a muscle in your brain. And, like, if you're judgmental to other people, and if you're judgmental to yourself, like, you're training that muscle to do that. Like, you're training your brain to recognize, like, differences in people and, like, differences that don't subscribe to a specific model. And so I had kind of written, like, advice on how to feel more confident. It's like, you can also start by, like, not pointing out those judgments as other people, because you're, like, stop training that muscle to see it in yourself. So, you know, I can, like, I've been enjoying asking myself, like, oh, why do I find that less desirable or not attractive? Is it actually something that, like, is it actually something that I believe, or is it some sort of, like, is it to this model that I've been taught?
That you've been
taught? Yeah.
So, but what, sorry, someone just came up and through the window was like, your show looks so fun. It's probably because I'm like, you know, but okay. That is so real. I totally feel you. I feel like, and this isn't just in the realm of just attractiveness, but when I've been able to, like, accept myself a little bit more, that's also opened up my world slowly, and it takes a while to be able to see all the possibility in others, which is, like, literally, like, practicing what you preach.
Yeah.
And similarly, like, not being as judgmental about, like, oh, like, that body type, like, I'm not attracted to that. Doing less of that, or being more consciously aware of when I am doing that, and, like, being in conversation with that, has also allowed me to see myself, I feel like, as sexier, like, just in my own self-image.
100%. Yeah, and I think it's, like, where I am still, like, trying to stop the judgmental, like, brain is because I feel like, kind of what we've both been saying, like, we feel like we've seen the light, or just, like, you know, started on this journey of, like, growth in not being so hard on ourselves and being hard on other people, and just, like, expanding horizons. When I see people who don't have that mindset, I am unfortunately, like, jump to the conclusion of, like, well, they're not clearly as, like, mindful as I am, or something, you know. And I think
right.
I, like, again, I can't change somebody else's mindset. Like, that's not my job, and it's not what I want to be spending my energy with. But I think that's where dating is specifically really hard, because it's, like, unfortunately, the way other people see you is kind of the whole point of dating. So it's like, you want to be able to control that. It's like, I wish everyone would expand their horizons in the same way that I feel like I'm starting to expand my horizons. But unfortunately, like, I can't change people's mindsets. So
exactly. But then maybe if we use the same kind of, like, reasoning as what we said, which is, like, you put in that work that was hard, and, like, kind of in response to some of that judgment or discrimination, honestly, that you've experienced, like, you can't expect that other people have done the same thing. And when it comes to dating, I feel like when you're looking for a real partner, at least for me, it's like, I want to be with someone who has done that.
Yeah.
Which is necessarily to say, or perhaps necessarily saying, that it just makes it harder to date one person.
Yeah.
Because, like, for them to do that work, you know, it's like, who's going to be the one to make them do the work?
Yeah.
Except for them.
Yeah.
And why would they do the work if what they're subscribed to is working for them?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I do remember, like, one of the first times I hooked up with another Asian person, like, that was the first time in the moment I had realized, like, wait a second, like, clearly not all Asian people are put into this one sexual identity box.
Yeah.
So therefore, like, I can't, like, I'm obviously not assuming that about this person that I'm with, that they're not assuming that about me. Like, so it was the first time I ever got to really ask myself in a relationship, in terms of, like, in a one-on-one interaction with somebody else, like, oh, what do I want out of this?
Yeah.
What do I enjoy? Like, what, you know, I got to actually ask and experience that question of, like, what brings myself and the other person pleasure, which I do feel like is almost sad that I didn't ask myself those questions before, because I just let kind of the racial stereotypes and boxes create those for me.
And I feel like another part of that from my experience is like, I think this is perhaps also in line with the stereotypes associated with Asian people, and whether it's Asian men or Asian women, of just like not being as much like the decision maker or the one in power, or like this goes into submission as well, but like almost having the decision be made for you. Like, I feel like it makes sense that when you were hooking up with another Asian, it's like there's not that like the white person who just like automatically makes the decision or like gets their way, where it's kind of more of like an equal playing field. It feels like it's no longer I think, operating on someone else's terms. It's like, oh yeah, like now I really got to figure out, and there's kind of a pressure to that too, of like, now I got to figure out, do I want to do that? Do I not want to do that?
Yeah.
Because making decisions or trying things in sex is really hard to do when it's just like a hookup, and you're less experienced and you have less room to explore.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's always, like, that's been my whole current chapter of how I see my growth into my 20s, mid-20s, is like, oh, I'm no longer just saying yes to what people have said that I will like, but now I have to actually figure out what I like.
Yeah. Which is also like being 20, like in your 20s in general, for like so many things. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And so I think it's been like, I'm trying to frame it as, because it is like a fun growth, independent thing, but it's also like, oh, it's just so much easier.
Yes, for sure.
When it's like trying to go on a date with a white person and they like aren't into me, I feel like I could almost like lean on the crutch of like, well, maybe they just like don't want to date a POC.
Yeah. Well, it's like where your mind automatically
like,
gravitates to.
Right. And then when I go on a date with another Asian person, it's like it's almost like there was a crutch that I had where I was like, oh, okay, well, like maybe they don't like me because it's like me. Which is, again, like another thing that like you just have to ask yourself, and it's like could be the truth. And so I think that's kind of an interesting, not to say that that's like reason enough for me to never want to date an Asian person, because I don't want to face that rejection, but like it's a new level of rejection that's way different from like a white person not wanting to date me solely because of my race. It's then the opposite, where it's like, oh, actually it has nothing to do with my race. It's just me.
It could be my it could be my voice. It could be my my personality, you know?
Yeah, I know. I'm like, is it just my personality? Like, that sucks.
Yeah. And it could also be that very delicate interplay and interbalance of like, oh, like you're too whitewashed, or you're too Asian, or
you're not Asian enough.
Yeah, and so then that's where shit gets trickier too. So where does that take you then?
You could continue to go down the layers of like, am I Asian enough? Am I not Asian enough? Am I too Asian? Did I come off in a certain way? But it's like, ultimately, I think in the same way that we talk about race and dating, it's like something you can't change about yourself or control. It's like, whether it's like my eye color or I don't know, I guess you could change your haircut, but it's like something
which we all do. We all do.
Right.
We be getting the Korean perm.
Yeah. And it's like I don't know. It's like even your style and personality is like ultimately something that's like true to you, and it should be something that you should want to like be proud of. And so, yeah, when it comes to personality, like for example, been on dates with Asian people, and my personality red flag that I feel like I always get self-conscious about is like, oh my God, was I just too loud or too crazy or too wild or like way too personal on the first date? Which is like,
been there, done that.
For people who know me, I don't know. We've all been there. And then I'm like, okay, but that's actually like never something I would want to change about myself.
Yes.
And I do feel like it has been, in my current age, it's easier to tell myself that about like my personality, my style, things that I like, my core values, in a way that my younger self wouldn't used to say about being Asian, which I think is interesting. Like, you know, if I was feeling rejection because I was Asian, I would never have in the same way that I'm like, I'm an extrovert, I'm loud, they're gonna have to deal with it. I was never as unapologetically Asian and saying like, well, you know what, screw it, like I'm a Korean American and like they can take it or leave it, screw them. So I do think that's interesting just personally about how I felt about myself. And like what I feel more unapologetic about.
Years ago, or when I was in college, and maybe I was like thirsting over a white guy or a white guy friend who I like have a crush on, which has happened to me, not to out myself, but like I felt like before my relationship in this realm with reality was so different, where it's like, oh, but if I just do this, or if I just demonstrate that I'm not like the other X fill in the blank, or I have more personality than fill in the blank, very dangerous territory to go into if you're an Asian American, then I will be the first, or I will, completely change their minds about what they see in who they think I am, which is like so not what you want to have to do when you're being with anyone, let alone a lifelong partner. Do you have any other advice for the people feeling undesired or struggling with feeling attractive?
There's often the like mental fallacy that like 99% of people believe this way. So therefore, if I don't subscribe to that same mindset, I'm left with 1%. And when it comes to dating, like that's everyone's worst nightmare, is your dating pool being small. But it's like, for me, I feel like one thing I try to ground myself in is it's like, there could be 99 people who want to fetishize me and like subscribe to this problematic mentality. But if all you really need is one person. Like you just need one person.
Yeah, you just need one person in the room.
Yeah.
100 people in the room and 99 don't believe in you, and you just need one to believe in you. You can have 100 people in the room that are watching you and 99 don't believe.
100 people in the room and 99 don't.
100 people.
And then on top of that, there are so many more people who do not think that way that you would so much rather be with.
99 don't believe it. All it takes is one.
Okay, so your argument is kind of the plenty of fish politics of it.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. I like that.
I think that's where I
like
stand.
that.
And then I would say advice to people. My two things I think are just like confidence and kindness. When I've had this mental exercise, like what do I find sexy? Like I find confidence really sexy, and I think a lot of people do. And
yes,
like I've made a rule when I go out with my friends, because we often will just spiral down this road of like, oh, like why don't people want to blah, 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 and we just get so negative.
Yeah, yes, of course.
And it's
yes,
like,
yes. Which, by the way, going out is the most depressing thing ever.
I know, it's like not fun in the
like
first place.
going out never is how you want it to be, but yes.
Yeah, and so we've like made a rule. It's like we're not allowed, like we are not getting down on ourselves. Like anytime we even feel the urge, we're just gonna fake it and just like gas somebody else up, because that is. And I always think about this Megan Thee Stallion interview with Dua Lipa, where Dua's like, what's the number one rule to be a hot girl? And she's like, hot girls aren't Judge Judy. Like if you're judging people, if you're judging yourself, like you can tell. And so confidence is number one. And then just like kindness, the advice I was given was just like, anytime you feel this self-doubt of like desirability, or you feel unsexy, you just say like 2 positive things about yourself, and you have to start like so small. Like I always just say the same thing of just like, I like the shirt that I'm wearing, and I have a cute painting in my room. And it's like nice, 2 like super nice things, and it just helps you practice like seeing yourself in the mirror.
Getting in that mindset. Yes.
And so those are 2 things I've been doing, and I like love doing it. I mean, the confidence is the biggest one. There's nothing more powerful than like going out with your gays and just like feeling like you own the town, even if you don't. Like,
yes,
you just feel like
even if the evidence is not evidencing of people like approaching.
Yeah, 100%. It just feels so good. I feel like I'm one queer person of color who has like only been thinking about these things for like a few years, and like I'm obviously like roller coaster upwards, like up and down, and like I'm not perfect, but I'm excited to see like what other people have to say on this.
Yeah, I think people I'm like talking to have a lot to say. So
love it.
Get ready for this episode to drop, and we're gonna do a multi-part probably.
Yay!
Okay, thank
excited.
you. Okay, T, we're going straight into talking about it. Let me take out my little AirPods. Not that that's the sound that they actually make. Oh my god, I realized I'm yelling. Ugh. Sometimes it's hard being a loud person. Okay, so what stuck with me the most is the idea, like especially with Top Hood, being able to let go of binary, the same way that we are working towards removing the binary associated with gender and gender norms, is helping Daniel, and like helping Daniel from an internal standpoint and in what he attracts or who he's attracted to or what it is that he wants. I love that. So I guess I kind of want to just like if you're someone that you're kind of like, I guess I do kind of have a preference, or like I feel like what we're not going to do is blame. What we're not going to do is guilt. We're going to clock in, lock in. Ooh, I really want to make this good. Ooh, what word's going to come out? Clock in, lock in, click. I like click. Okay, so we're clicking. I was absolutely one of those gabies who got my first like sexual impulses by looking at the underwear section in Macy's. Okay, I'm really sorry. It's hard for me to admit. But yeah, like, especially because in my family of Chinese immigrants, like, I didn't come out till I was a senior in high school. And I wasn't even expecting to come out when I did come out. But like being closeted, you know, like you forget, we don't like to talk about it, but prepubescents are horny, okay? And all those underwear packages were obviously white people. At least like 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I feel like that coupled with, you know, the complete dearth of sexy Asians, except for Daniel Day Kim and except for Conrad Ricamora in How to Get Away with Murder. Like, I don't know if you're like me, if you're a gay like me. I know a lot of gays who had their like awakening. They were doing disgusting, nasty things during that show. While Viola Davis was talking about on the chalkboard how to get away with murder, the gay 14-year-olds were fapping it. Coupling that with something new, perhaps, that I want to bring to the table is like how little sex is talked about in a lot of Asian cultures, in a lot of first-gen Asian cultures, in a lot of first-gen cultures, in a lot of POC for underrepresented immigrant households, okay? When your concepts of sex in middle school, in high school, whatever, are brought onto you by other people and other people's stereotypes, that does something. For example, when I was in middle school, I was like, the whole like Asian girls have tight pussies, hate that word. Asian guys have small penises. I had like my white guy friends or the popular guys in middle school were telling me about my dick size. You know how insecure that makes someone about their dick size? Pretty fucking insecure. When there's like such an absence of talking about sex or healthy sex or the birds and bees, whatever, in some of these households, at least in comparison to all the sex galore that happens in American households and in American society, like, for me, what that did to me was like kind of more readily accept that I wasn't desirable in my body, that these stereotypes were true and that they were controlled by the people who were sharing them to me. Like, oh, you're a white guy, you're popular, you're the one who gets the girls, or like whatever. Like, I guess what you're saying is right, ? When I was first dating, and I'm not going to name names, but when I was first dating and one of them was a white guy, and I was young, guys. I still remember when this white guy that I dated told me that he wanted to move to California because the Asian guys are hot. And that was like the first date that we went on. For me, like, that wasn't weird. I remember thinking maybe that's a little weird, but I almost felt good. I almost felt special because when everything else that was being dictated to me told me that my face and who I am in this body is undesirable, I would snatch that like a fish, fishing for whatever, any kind of validation. That's why some of us people of color do be falling for white people who fetishize us, because everything else that's been communicated to us, mostly by white people, has made us feel terrible about ourselves. And you know what else is kind of interesting and perhaps messed up? That was probably the first time I ever felt sexy. Most of the relationships I've had were with white guys. I am more so now shaking off some of the shame related to that, but I felt like I was pretty hard on myself in terms of like, damn, like why can't I literally just change what I'm interested in? Why can't I just see this as differently? I've been unpacking this in therapy, and something that my therapist said was like, she really asked me just out of curiosity, like, when you were young, like, who were the people that you're like, when you were going through puberty, when you're learning about sex and you're understanding your body, who were the people who you were like linking those sexual impulses to? And I was like, oh, Well, it was definitely the white guys that I was friends with. And it was the white guys that I was friends with they were a hoot. Okay, I'm not going to say that they were just like, but more part of the reason why I was friends with them was because I wanted so badly to be accepted in white society as a 6th grader, as a 7th grader, and into my high school days. So that was kind of self-selecting on my end of, oh, like, I'm friends with the popular people. I want to be friends with the popular group. I kind of bought into this system, and also in the process continued reinforcing that system of like the desirable people are these white people. Like that just kept on feeding me liking white guys. To some extent, I created this. I created my own preference through socialization, which is to say it's something that I can also unwind. Exposing myself and seeing other people as sexy and beautiful and whatnot, who aren't white, who aren't just the norm, who aren't just the people who are, you know, have hegemony? I don't know. Is that the correct word? Use of the word? Ah! One thing that's helped me, that's my therapist has kind of helped me point out, is that just attraction does not equal action. To some extent, we're not going to be able to change everyone's preferences. This kind of applies to whether you're a person of color who has an affinity for white people, or if you're a white person who has an affinity for people of color, knowing that you don't have to act on your thoughts. To some extent, like letting yourself live in the attraction, maybe allowing it to live in that and questioning that and adding some level of awareness and really thinking about where that comes from. And not just diving into, let me look and see if their location is on Grindr. Let me try to hunt them down. That's where things can get weird and upholding the system. Another thing that's fun to understand is that your attraction can change. Oh my God. I don't necessarily know that I thought that before. Like when I was in college or high school, whatever. Like my preferences are changing. I know other people's preferences are changing, especially when it comes to like body type. And I was reading this like gay Reddit thing of this like kind of sad, beautiful story of this man who like, or this guy who like when they were younger, he like was friends with this straight guy and like, but then they kind of had a love situation and it was going so amazing, but he ultimately just didn't think he was attractive. So he rejected him. And then years later, he's back thinking about it because his type changed. Who he was attracted to changed. Like maybe I think the guy was a little bit on the thicker side, a little bit of a bigger guy. And now it's kind of like in the Reddit thread, he was like, I wish I had just been able to tell myself or to know that what I thought was hot was going to change. Sucks for you, I guess. Now, the last thing that I want to do is bring up one of my friends. Something that I've noticed in her is that she seems to not have this problem. She's black. Okay, wait, I didn't need to say it like that. She is black. And I've noticed that in her dating pool, which is pretty plentiful. She has a lot of options, guys. If anyone is on wait, she might be dating someone. But if she's not, you're going to want to slide into her DMs, okay? Here or here, okay? Yeah, which I guess means that you're going to need to watch the video. She has dated quite a few black men. And like, I was just curious to know how she kind of isn't racist towards herself in this way that, you know, like, frankly, I have been guilty of. That in the past, I have, you know, closed off the idea of dating another Asian person. And she said, yeah, I feel rather like this hasn't been my battle. I have many, but this one isn't. Go off. I think it's honestly because I feel like my classmates admittedly were quite kind to me growing up. Like they never made me feel undesirable or being black was something rare. Okay, great. So we're getting starting from a young age, she was more accepted in society. That's pretty fucking cool. I also think because my mom actually did great by making me feel beautiful and confident in that regard because my sisters are lighter skinned and I'm the only dark skinned girl. Okay, so we got the parental association, like, and validation and affirmation. Overall, I just kind of think whoever is for me will come to me even if they ruin my life. A lesson on how to love is always going to help me level up. And I just think about dating as an opportunity to be understood. So why would I want to date people, whites, who are unlikely to truly understand me and my perspective? I can thank Bell Hooks for that one. Thank you, Bell Hooks. Thank you, Sandra. That's awesome. I love this. I think your priorities are in the right place, Sandy. And another thing that I love is just like her relationship with reality. Like whoever's for me is for me. If someone wants to come to me, someone's going to come to me. And it's not because I'm going to go chasing after them. It's not because I'm going to go and reel them in like a fucking car, but because they're going to think I'm beautiful. And y'all, again, just saying, she's so beautiful. And she's hot, which is a word that sometimes we reserve only for white people. We call a lot of, like when it comes to women especially, I feel like we call a lot of people of color women beautiful, queen, goddess, which just goes to show that we still kind of see them in different buckets. So let's pour those buckets into one bigger kiddie pool, okay? And let's widen our scope and our understanding. Honestly, y'all, I feel like we've only scratched the surface with this. I want to talk about this more, and I know you guys want to talk about this more because people slid into the DMs, okay? I want to get into different gender presentations, different identities. We kind of focused a little bit more on race. There's a lot more to talk about. But if you have something to say, please DM me at Eric J. Chang or No So True Pod, okay? I want to hear everything, all of your thoughts. And if you want to say something, if you want to contribute, if you want to call in, send me a voice note. Or I'll even give you my phone number and you can call in. Thank you for tuning in. And I will